I'm going to talk to you and show you some examples of writing interventions I've used in my classroom in my therapy room. So I love to use word families. As a classroom teacher, I would pick one word family a week, and the beauty of word families, whether it's at, in, on, ac, as you see here, is that with just teaching your students the 30 most commonly found word families, and perfectly aligns to the number of weeks in a school year, right? So you teach those 30, and then your students actually will be able to read and write over 500 words by just using those word families. And so to me, this is a great way to start, and it was certainly an approach I used with my students with very significant disabilities, including intellectual disabilities. So on this sheet, I'm meeting a student where they are at the word level. And actually, by providing the word family ACK as a model, what I really need them to do is just come up with the initial sound. So you could even scaffold this activity to have them identify, okay, number one, we see a girl's back. So for some students, maybe you just want to get them to write the sound that says B. For others, maybe you want to have them write the word back. And maybe for another student, you actually want him or her to write out a sentence. The girl is facing the other way. I see her back. And you can work through that worksheet, scaffolding it for many different learners. Something else I love to do for my emerging writers is to create a center that you can see here. So I have color-coded a subject card, a verb action card, and then a place card. And so students actually build their own sentences and have a lot of fun doing so. So for some students, perhaps I actually would ask them to just build, almost like a puzzle, build a sentence and put the pictures in place and then read it. Whereas others, I want them to build the sentence but use their own writing. The girl writes blank blank school, and actually have to have them generate those two blank blank words. Some students, you might need to write those for them. So again, this is an activity that you can scaffold at many levels and becomes a great center for independent writing in your classroom. Something else that I think students have a lot of fun with while learning a great deal is to actually type up sentences and then cut them up so that students have to put the pieces of the sentence together and actually construct a sentence. And who doesn't love using a glue stick? So all of a sudden, the labored task of writing becomes this fun task where we're putting together a puzzle, which is a sentence. And so here we were practicing the morpheme of ED. I like to say to my students, I sing a little song to remind them, already happened, ED. And so we were working on those action words that have already happened, and they then were forming sentences because we had practiced writing at the word level and adding ED, but now we wanted to expand it. But these students had a lot of occupational therapy needs based on their graphomotor weakness. And so what we decided to do was they could build a sentence that I had already typed out. Something that as we sort of get more sophisticated in the writing skills that I like to use with students is to really teach the difference between a fragment and a sentence. And as you can see in this intervention material that I created here, what I've done is talk to students about how a sentence has every piece. It's a puzzle with all its pieces. But a fragment is a puzzle that's missing a few pieces. There's a few words that aren't there, so it's incomplete. And so it can start as a very receptive task where you use some sentence strips and you show the students love puppies. And maybe every student has these two signs, a sentence sign and a fragment sign. And so you ask them, is love puppies a sentence or a fragment? And I just sort of give it this certain intonation so that that academic language really attaches for them. And once they master it receptively, you can turn it into an expressive task. Okay, It's a fragment. How are we going to turn this fragment into a sentence? So there's many ways you can expand on this. It would probably happen over the course of a few lessons. In the top part there, you can see the yellow, orange, and blue cards. That's actually to expand the lesson a little bit further, and you present some of the words at first, knowing it's a fragment, but then asking the students, what words would you want to add, and where would you put them to make this fragment a sentence? Another way to build on your students' existing language is to give sentence starters. So many students with speech and language needs struggle with sequencing. So I want to build in this language of temporal markers from very early on so that first, next, then, and finally become very familiar words that, much like the, to, or an, become sight words because they're so familiar with seeing them. And so when I want to do a sequencing writing activity, I actually present those words already on the paper. The students can draw the images in the order of, say we just did a cooking activity, and they're going to draw out the steps and then write as much as they can. And for each student, that may be a little different. Again, it could be a sound, it could be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be a full sentence. To expand for some of my students who are more emergent in their writing skills, I do something called sharing news. Now this is something that starts as a verbal task in the beginning of the school year, and we start each sentence by sharing news, remembering that a good news reporter answers all the key WH questions, who, what, when, where, why, but they also do it succinctly. And we talk about what that means, that you don't want to just elaborate so your listener falls asleep. But how do you make sure that your listener gets all the information while not taking too long? And so it's a structure that my students become familiar with that then we transfer into a writing activity so they can share news by answering those same questions. To scaffold, I have it modeled on top, I provide a template on the bottom, and then what's somewhat faded as a third way to approach on the very bottom, students can change the order. So the questions don't always have to be answered in the when, who, where, what, why order, but perhaps they want to get more creative as they get more confident with their syntax, but could still use the check mark box to ensure that they covered all the questions like a great reporter.